Vote the bums out is not just a totally failed strategy, but focusing on it as a solution to the problems that we face. That is, the largest government in history that constantly violates the Constitution and your liberty 24/7, 365. This is actually making things worse to think about this as a solution. Now, I think this should be obvious, but to hammer it home today, I've got warnings and insight on this from people like Samuel Adams, the father of the American Revolution, Thomas Jefferson, and a few others, plus a bunch from Lysander Spooner. But first of all, welcome and thank you for joining me here on the path to liberty. My name is Michael Bolden with the 10th Amendment Center, and this is the show for Monday, April 22nd, 2024. Hope you had an awesome weekend despite some of the bad news. We got to make the most of our time in life on this earth here, of course. But here's some of the bad news that actually inspired my thoughts for this today. And of course, if you've been following things, you're aware of this Section 702, this mass warrantless surveillance thing that just got approved and signed into law. And here's how Elizabeth Gotein, I apologize if I pronounced that improperly, Brennan Center over on X. She says, it's over for now. A majority of senators caved to the fear-mongering, as usual, I should just add as a side, and Bush League tactics of the administration and surveillance hawks in Congress, and they sold out Americans' civil liberties. As always, we thought the Patriot Act was bad, and that's as bad as it can get. No, of course, they're always going to make things worse. We know here, of course, you're very well aware of this. I share it all the time, that allowing them to get away with something and then waiting for them to stop doing what they shouldn't have been doing in the first place only guarantees that they establish the detestable precedent and they're going to do more. But that's an aside. I'm kind of jumping ahead here. Elizabeth says Section 702 has been reauthorized, not just without any reforms, because they wanted to get reforms. This is what we've been hearing for a decade on warrantless surveillance, is we just got to reform this, and then they pass some reform or maybe get an amendment. It doesn't change anything. They do a lawsuit. It doesn't change anything. And then, of course, the other solution we'll get to today, so-called solution. She says, but instead of just not having reforms, it added one of the most dramatic and terrifying expansions of government surveillance authority in history. One of the top worst ones. She said the provision effectively grants the NSA access to the communications equipment of almost any U.S. business, plus huge numbers of organizations and individuals. It's a gift to any president, so that's all of them, who may wish to spy on political enemies, journalists, ideological opponents, etc. But if we thought that was enough, just wait. There's more that they've been trying to shove down our throats just in the last few days. Here from the redheaded libertarian over on X, she points out that they're moving forward with all kinds of additional spending and control, whether it's financial so-called aid for foreign countries that, supporting one side of a war or another without declaring war, forcing the sale of a business, etc. She put it this way: we will see more abuses of power over the next 6 months than we've seen in the last 4 years. And whether that's exactly correct or not, I don't think really matters. What she's recognizing is that they're ramping things up. I'm not sure if she understands the root cause or not, but I would hope so. The deep state, she says, will legislate and order as much irreversible damage as they can to secure their controlled demolition of our values, national pride, food security, wealth, and economy. But none of this should be a surprise. The fact that once they do something, they attack on, make something worse. And then all of a sudden it seems like they're hitting you with a zillion things at the same time. John Adams, of course, warned us about this back when he was one of the good guys before he flipped the switch. Like so many people, once they get in power, the people who tell you, don't trust anyone with power, that really includes the people who told you don't trust anyone with power, because as soon as they get it, they go the wrong direction as well. Like John Adams, Jefferson did some bad stuff, Madison, all of them, really. But he put it this way, as Novanglis in February of 1775. The nature of encroachment upon the American Constitution is such as to grow every day more and more encroaching. Like a cancer, it eats faster and faster every hour. So as the redheaded libertarians point out, they're going to jam through a bunch of stuff more in the next 6 months than they did in the last 4 years. And maybe it will be that. Maybe we can quantify that. Maybe we can't. But we certainly see the ramping up. And even if they slow it down for a little bit over time, they certainly get worse and worse and worse. It is like a government power is a deadly disease. As long as people are addicted to it, it will kill us all. But John Adams continued. He put it this way. He said, the revenue creates pensioners, and the pensioners urge for more revenue. The people grow less steady, spirited, and virtuous. The seekers more numerous and more corrupt. And every day increases the circles of their dependence and expectance. So as government power grows, as people become more corrupt, and the people grow less spirited, less prone to resist the power because they've established one thing, then you get more people as part of the system, dependent on the system in and of itself. We see this all around us today. He said, until virtue, integrity, public spirit, simplicity, frugality become the objects of ridicule, and scorn and vanity, luxury, foppery, selfishness, meanness, and downright venality swallow up the whole society. This is an excellent example of what we live under today. And it's not just because one side is bad and the other side is just going after them or vice versa. That's what they want us to believe. But the source of the problem is encroachment upon the liberties of the people, violations, usurpations of power, centralization of power. The more you centralize power, the more you end up with this as a result. But what are we being told is the solution? I mean, some people are telling us one version, but what I saw, especially in response to FISA 702 reauthorization, over and over and over and over, basically the same thing. Here from Bridget over, I'll link to all these. Actually, Alan Mosley will organize the blog post for this episode like he does every single one, and he'll put together all these links so you can see these posts as well. Here's someone over on X who said, to everyone who called and emailed about stopping Section 702, thank you, and do not be black-pilled. Vote these people out. That's the solution from Bridget. Or Gerald Salente, who you guys might know, posted, vote them all out. Edward Snowden says, come November, remember what they took from you. Remember, the 5th of November is not really a meme for supporting vote the bumps out. It's a different type of resistance. And then here from Amy, the head of policy over at BitChute, where we archive all of our videos as well. For those of you who follow us over at BitChute, we're very grateful for that. But Amy Paykoff says, okay, it's official. Our senators can't even manage to pass a watered-down warrant requirement to protect Americans and U.S. persons from the sorts of abuses the FBI has committed hundreds of thousands of times, hundreds of thousands of violations that they tell us about. So it's probably in the millions easily. And her solution is the hashtag vote them out. We're being told over and over and over that the solution to this problem is to vote them out. Now, to hand it to Edward Snowden, someone did reply to him and said, hey, I don't think we're going to fix this through voting. He said, probably not, but it's free to try. And I actually disagree with that. Maybe that should be another episode if you're interested. I don't think it is actually free to try, especially if that's the proposed solution and that's all people are doing. And that's what most people do, is sit around and wait. They vote bums out, they support a candidate, they get trapped into voting for the lesser of two evils. This year, we've got the guy who signed the largest expansion of unconstitutional federal surveillance power since the Patriot Act, one of the worst in history, versus the guy who enforced more federal gun control than anyone in history and bragged about it. This is not a good option, but they love it when they trick you into opposing one dude by supporting a nasty other one. Anyways, here's how Lysander Spooner responds to this, and I think it's very appropriate. Here from his essay on the trial by jury in 1852, he said, neither is it of any avail to say that if the government abuse its power and enact unjust and oppressive laws, that's familiar, isn't it? The government may be changed by the influence of discussion and the exercise of the right of suffrage. So Spooner's basically just saying, look, this is not a response. When government is violating your rights, people are going to tell you, well, we'll just tell them that they're making a mistake. How many times have we been told here? Whenever we talk about the limits of the Constitution, they're like, oh, someone should show this to everyone in Congress. No, we have to show it to everyone else, because as long as those people are on board, it doesn't matter what the hell Congress does. We're not trying to convince Congress to stop. We're trying to show them that if they go too far, they will be stopped. That's really the way you have to address it. But Spooner gets that. He said, discussion can do nothing to prevent the enactment or procure the repeal of unjust laws unless it be understood that the discussion is to be followed by resistance. Now, if you say, hey, we're going to vote you out, and if not, You're going to be stopped one way or another. That's a different story rather than we're going to keep trying to vote people out and sue them in their system until we can convince them to stop doing what they weren't authorized to do. This is not the actions of a free people. This is a population on its knees begging for scraps. And Spooner put it this way: tyrants care nothing for discussions that are to end only in discussion. Discussions which do not interfere with the enforcement of their laws are but idle wind to them. And we can even go back to Alexander Hamilton, of all people. One of the biggest big government guys of the founding had a bunch more backbone than most people today. And here's how he described usurpations of power. Acts outside the limits of the Constitution. He's discussing specifically the Supremacy Clause. He said, "It will not follow from this doctrine that the acts of the large society which are not pursuant to its constitutional powers, but which are invasions of the residuary authorities of the smaller societies, will become the supreme law of the land. These will be merely acts of usurpation and will deserve to be treated as such. A usurpation is a theft of power from the people of the several states. It is an exercise of unconstitutional power. This is the invasion they don't want us to know about. The big invasion we're really facing is an invasion upon the limits of the Constitution, an invasion upon the reserved powers of the people, which is also, we could say, the states, the people of the several states as they determine in each of their own states. But as they go beyond the limits, we have to understand that they're usurpations, and they deserve to be treated as such. That doesn't mean, hey, you guys robbed from me, I'm going to wait for you to decide that you should give it back to me. That's not how you treat a usurper or an invader. Anyways, let's go back to Spooner here on suffrage. He said, suffrage is equally powerless and unreliable. It can be exercised only periodically, and the tyranny must at least be borne until the time for suffrage comes. So at best, it's unreliable. In most situations, Spooner is telling us it's powerless against usurpations. Now, Hamilton there in Federalist 33, and again, I think it was 26 or 28, he wasn't talking about vote the bums out when he was talking about resistance. He actually went into a discussion of like, well, if they're going to try to establish a standing army, let's talk about how we can balance the powers of the people versus the feds and who's going to win in that scenario. So this is a different discussion rather than just choosing new people. And Spooner, almost a century later, is saying this is just powerless and unreliable. He said, besides, when the suffrage is exercised, it gives no guarantee for the repeal of existing laws that are oppressive, and no security against the enactment of new ones that are equally so. And this should, again, be obvious. How many times were we told to change the bums in response to the Patriot Act, especially the Affordable Care Act? Vote the bums out, sue them in court, vote the bums out, new group of people, we'll get rid of it. The best we can even get at this point, because once it's established, it gets worse and worse and worse. The best we get from these people now is not a total opposition to it, or even an opposition to the underlying notion that the government should be involved in healthcare in the first place. The best we get is we're going to repeal and replace this. And this is the mentality of a tyrant, to continue going with stuff they never should have gone with in the first place. So here's Spooner again. He said the second body of legislators, so if you vote the bums out, what are you going to get? You're going to get, let's say you can get rid of all of them. You're going to get a new group of people, right? And you never get all new people. You just get maybe one or two or a handful that sound good. And then over time, they flip the switch. They get something on them, or they were just bad people and lying to you in the first place because they're politicians, and that's a vast majority of them. He said the second body of legislators are liable and likely to be just as tyrannical as the first. We could think about this in relationship to the Speaker of the House as just one example. Now, that was an election, a small election, but this is a version of suffrage. Okay, supposedly you're going to get rid of one dude, and then you're going to come in with the next guy. And this guy's going to sound good, but ultimately, the people who chose the first guy chose someone terrible. So why would they be good at choosing somebody good the second time around? And that's the point that Spooner is making here as well. The second body of legislators are liable and likely to be just as tyrannical as the first. If it be said that the second body may be chosen for their integrity, The answer is, well, the first were chosen for that very reason and yet proved tyrants. The second will be exposed to the same temptations as the first and will be just as likely to prove tyrannical. And one more from Spooner right here, just to close out this important point. He said, the right of suffrage, therefore, and even a change of legislators, guarantees no change of legislation, certainly no change for the better. And if you think about all the years that we've had since passage of the Patriot Act is just one example, the Affordable Care Act, and so many other things that have been passed, changing the legislators over and over and over. Either you just don't get enough of them changed to actually get the result you want, so it's a failure, or the new people become bad, or there's just not enough of them. So it's just the end result is government keeps growing. It keeps getting worse and worse and worse. And he makes a very important point here as well. He said, even if a change for the better actually comes, it comes too late because it comes only after more or less injustice has been irreparably done. So once they get their fangs into you, the odds of actually removing them become difficult, the more difficult the longer they're there. That's the same kind of point that Samuel Adams made in one of his great essays writing as Candidus in the Boston Gazette. This one's from December 9th, 1771. He pointed out that when an act injurious to freedom has once been done and the people bear it, the repetition of it is more likely to meet with submission. Again, as I mentioned just a few minutes ago, we're going to have links to all this stuff, all these references, the Spooner's great essay, all the posts on X, some of the original source documents, Hamilton, Samuel Adams. I've got some Jefferson coming up and a bunch of other stuff. Plus, you'll find all the different platforms on. Of course, we live stream on the mainstream platforms like YouTube and X and LinkedIn and Twitch. And where else? We also live stream over at rumble.com and odyssey.com. I really appreciate you guys using these so-called alt platforms. You could make them more mainstream, especially if they're run properly or they're decentralized, like Odyssey is a really great one for that. And then we're all on all the audio-only podcast platforms that we've been able to find so far. If we're missing from something that's important to you, please do let us know, whether it's a comment here or in the archive, or you can email me, team@10thamendmentcenter.com. So Alan Mosley will get the blog post with all that information, plus all the reference links I'm mentioning, and I'll get that published a couple hours after this live stream is done. I want to take a quick moment to say hello to everyone here in the live chat. I appreciate you being here. Again, whether this is your first episode or you've been here for every single one since day one, awesome. Thank you and welcome. There's Haji and Cheriton, Sin Nobre, Senator DT, my accent is terrible, Jugalassis, Cheriton Farmer, Howard, C&T Designs, Crew Chief, R.C. Andrews, J. Armstrong, Murray Ray, Merkin Muffley, the president, John, and everyone else. I know I'm skipping over a few people, but again, I appreciate you being here. But let's get back to this. It's important to point out, as Samuel Adams said, that as long as you turn a blind eye to it, once you allow it to happen, then it's going to happen more and more. You're going to have more and more submission. John Dickinson, I didn't have the link to it planned out for this episode, but in his great Letters from a Farmer in Pennsylvania, and I think in that essay, Samuel Adams was doing a tip of the hat to John Dickinson from 1767, 1768 as well. He pointed out that his greatest concern was the smallest usurpation of power, because that is the one most likely to be submitted to. And then it's going to establish a precedent. They're going to build on that over time. And he gave a number of examples throughout those essays that are very important. Anyways, here's how James Otis Jr. put it also in 1767. He was writing as freeborn American. He said, "There is nothing, however, nothing that will destroy liberty more than a prevailing opinion that it is better tamely to submit than nobly assert and vindicate our privileges." So that doesn't mean you have to get into an all-out battle at every turn. But if you're literally just submitting and then trying to convince people with power to do the right thing, that is the most dangerous thing to liberty, according to James Otis Jr. And we didn't get too much disagreement with it. Well, here's Hamilton. Again, I was mentioning another one of his episodes, or one of his essays here, Federalist number 28. He points out that if the representatives of the people betray their constituents. Now, Hamilton was maybe a little arrogant, maybe a little. Hamilton and many of the other Federalists thought they came up with this perfect, well, not perfect, but a really great system of checks and balances that would really reduce the likelihood of the bad guys rising to the top. But it didn't take too long. Hamilton was one of those who rose to the top of echelons of power and was very influential right off the bat. But they thought they created this system, or they convinced the people that they created this system, that the checks and balances would really make it very unlikely that the people would have to resist all the time. But many of the Federalists also said, well, that's why when government gets out of line, as James Iredell, for example, put it, when government usurps power, the people will resist. That's how you keep them in check. But anyways, here's how Hamilton put it in Federalist 28. If the representatives of the people betray their constituents, that's constant, he said, there is then no resource left but in the exertion of that original right of self-defense, which is paramount to all positive forms of government. So the people are the source of power. From their authority flows power to delegated, and it can be withdrawn at any time. We can see this in the Declaration of Independence, for example, or in some of the ratification documents of the Constitution. They send power to state governments, to local governments, to the federal or general government, and they have ultimate authority, and they can do what they please. So if the government goes beyond their limits, it's not up to the government to decide that government violated the rules given to the government by the people of the several states. They can resort to their original natural right of self-defense. And here's how Jefferson described that. Thomas Jefferson, in his draft for the Kentucky Resolutions of 1798 against John Adams's hated Alien and Sedition Acts. Hamilton was probably a fan of those as well. I haven't actually studied Hamilton's opinion on those, but that's a different story. He said, in cases of an abuse of the delegated powers, Thomas Jefferson wrote, the members of the general government being chosen by the people, a change by the people would be the constitutional remedy. For those of you who have listened to or watched this show for any amount of time, you know that Thomas Jefferson is telling us, and if it's Thomas Jefferson's opinion on how to enforce the Constitution versus really pretty much anybody alive today, it's almost a hands-down, no-brainer choice on that one. Jefferson's telling us that vote the bums out is to be used in a situation where they're abusing the delegated powers. But that means they're just using the powers given to them or delegated to them in ways that you don't like it, or they're being abusive with them. They're regulating commerce too much. They're declaring war too often. You don't want them to declare war, but they're still doing it within the bounds of the Constitution. That's when you use vote the bums out. The change by the people would be the constitutional remedy. But for everything else, Jefferson told us, where powers are assumed which have not been delegated, a nullification of the act is the rightful remedy. And this is what we're talking about, the natural right of self-defense. It's up to the people in each state to make their own determination if their rights are being violated and to do something about it. Up to them. We don't know exactly how things are going to play out or what the right strategy is for the people of each state. That's arrogant to tell us, for us to tell them exactly what to do. And he said every state, and if you're talking about states in this situation, Madison discussed this as well in his report of 1800, describing or explaining in detail the Virginia resolutions, which were passed in conjunction with Jefferson's in Kentucky in 1798. When he's talking about states in this scenario, we're talking about the states in their highest sovereign capacity, that is, of the people composing each state. This is not about a geographical plot or a group of elected people in a state government. But he says that every state has a natural right, in cases not within the compact, to nullify of their own authority all assumptions of power by others within their limits. And without this right, they would be under the dominion, absolute and unlimited, of whosoever might exercise this right of judgment for them. So as long as you're leaving it up to the government to determine that as long as you leave it to the federal government to determine if the federal government violated the rules given to it in the Constitution, you are submitting to unlimited power. That's how Thomas Jefferson described it. Or here's Samuel Adams. He's pointing out this attitude that's so sorely missing. It is seriously missing today. It's a 1-2 punch. You have to have a love of freedom and a willingness and the backbone to defend it. He said, the truth is, all might be free if they valued freedom and defended it as they ought. Or we've got the Lysander Spooner version from the very last paragraph of No Treason number 6, published in 1870. It's something you should definitely read. It talks a lot about consent and things like this. But this is, I think, the real money quote in this essay. He said, as long as mankind continue to pay national debts, so-called, that is, so long as they are such dupes and cowards as to pay for being cheated, plundered, enslaved, and murdered, so long there will be enough to lend the money for those purposes. And with that money, a plenty of tools called soldiers can be hired to keep them in subjection. This is really what we're hearing from James Otis Jr. back in 1767. Not as wordy as Spooner is here in 1870, but certainly as long as people continue to submit. There is nothing more dangerous to liberty than the mentality that you should tamely submit to it. Because as long as you continue to submit it, as Otis put it in another section, another essay, he said, as long as people submit to arbitrary measures, so long they will find masters. And there's no difference really to me than in how Spooner is putting this here. And he points out the solution. When they refused any longer to pay for being thus cheated, plundered, enslaved, and murdered, they will cease to have cheats and usurpers and robbers and murderers and blood money loanmongers for masters. And if you think about that in conjunction to what Samuel Adams pointed out, it's very, very similar. All might be free if they valued freedom and defended it as they ought. As long as they believe, as long as they understand that when government does these horrible things, they are attacking your freedom. They are not protecting you. It's not a trade-off. It's not worthwhile. They're bad at it. And all the excuses they give us are absolute garbage. So you're not valuing freedom if you're willing to give it away for so-called security from government like this. But when they value it and they have the backbone to defend it, whether the government likes it or not, then people will be free. And from that mentality, we can understand why Samuel Adams, in that same essay in the Boston Gazette in October of 1771, he had utter disdain for a people who would not take a stand for their own freedom. He said, if therefore a people will not be free, if they have not virtue enough to maintain their liberty against a presumptuous invader, they deserve no pity and are to be treated with contempt and ignominy. And again, he's using that term invader, the mentality of when government attacks your rights, when government does things it's not supposed to do. This is an invasion. This is an invasion of your reserved powers. This is an invasion beyond the limits of the Constitution. We can look at invasion being borders, and when they cross a line, well, the Constitution is a border, a set of rules around the government, and the Constitution does not enforce itself. It never did. It never will. It takes a people willing to take a stand for liberty again, whether the government likes it or not. Well, I hope you guys found this interesting. Hope it was educational. I hope you're fired up like I am. We've got a big week ahead of us here at the Path to Liberty. Hopefully I got some pretty exciting episodes for you to check out. But if you want to help us spread the word, absolutely nothing helps us roll up our sleeves every single day and do this kind of work in support of the Constitution and liberty more than the financial faith and support of our members. If you got a couple of bucks of that dirty government fiat, please consider throwing it our way over at 10thamendmentcenter.com/members. Of course, we do accept other payment options as well. So I appreciate any consideration that you can give to joining us today. Again, 10thamendmentcenter.com/members. Take another quick moment to say hello to everyone in the live chat. There's Litecoin Liberty and Bitcoin Apostle over on X. Really appreciate you guys being here, talking about other forms of payment. There's couple of interesting ones that we appreciate as well. Haji says Rumble is rocking again. That's really great. We've been seeing a lot of activity in the live chat over on Rumble. I appreciate you guys joining us. Whatever platform is best for you, we want to be there. Now, we're not fans of what most of these tech entrepreneurs support politically. But as long as we have a way to reach people with this message, we are going to be on as many platforms as possible. I know we've got to get on more of them. I've been thinking about live streaming on Telegram. If you guys are interested in that, please do let me know. But anyways, I appreciate you letting me know that, Haji. See if there's any other comments or questions that I can get back to. RC points out an interesting thing about education. It's easier to manage, manipulate, and reorganize the minds of youngsters than to restore all the shattered souls. Yeah, it's certainly important. Education is a tough one, especially when government runs the education system. So it's incumbent upon us. This is why we do this kind of work. We are trying to educate and maybe re-educate. I mean, I don't want to sound like Orwellian here, but we're really trying. I'm having to uneducate myself. I spent my entire life in government-run schools. I grew up a proud socialist. I mean, if I can go from where I was there to where I am today, and I've got much further to go to be better on the principles of liberty, and I know every time I look back a few years, I'm like, man, I really sucked at that point. But if I can do this, anybody can do this. Anyways, I appreciate you being here. Hope you enjoyed the episode. I'm very grateful for you spending some of your time with me today. I'm grateful for any consideration you can give to joining us as a member over at 10thamendmentcenter.com/members. I hope you have an awesome day, and I hope to see you next time here on the Path to Liberty.